Hiyo everyone, I am finally doing it. I made a whole presentation for you guys who asked me to defend my position against prostitution. For those of you that wanted me to go more in depth into it, I finally did, and it took a long time. It took a few days to compile everything, but I did it. So I present to you. Is prostitution consensual? Now I know it's going to be a weird first impression when you see that title, but just give me a chance to explain myself as we go through the slides. And I want this presentation to be useful for anyone who finds it very hard to verbalize why they are against any form of prostitution. Feel free to use this presentation video to inform them and, educate them on the topic. Because I know it was really hard for me to put my thoughts together to verbalize exactly why I felt the way I felt. For this particular topic, it's very difficult, and I especially found that out through having to research. So feel free to link this, download the video, make sure people see it, the more the better. So here it is. Is prostitution consensual? So the first thing we have to do is define prostitution, because believe it or not, people don't seem to understand the definition of prostitution. And when you Google prostitution, it literally says engaging in sexual activity with someone for payment. So the reason that is synonymous with sex work is because all sex work requires sexual activity that you're doing for payment. So this does not mean that prostitution is only street walking, hooking, and things like that in its most known forms. This also includes the modern forms, such as nudes on OnlyFans, nudes on Patreon, or lewd, nudity implied, etc. And I addressed that in this slide. Modern prostitution. Examples of prevalent modern prostitution are pornography, obviously. And again, these all fall under the definition of prostitution. You are selling a sexual activity to somebody. Cam models or cam girls, because they do things intended to sexually please others in exchange for money. Agreeing to accept payment for sexual or sexually implied video footage or images for sexual gratification. Anything that falls under that is also prostitution. Because I know some people will try to say that, oh, selling foot pics isn't prostitution. Selling it to these pedophiles. That's what it's called, by the way. Isn't that funny? It's a funny word. It's a little close to pedophiles. That's what makes it so funny. But yeah, people who are into feet, pedophiles. Selling your foot pictures is still prostitution because you're selling a sexual activity. It is sexually pleasuring them. They are sexually into feet. So that also counts. You don't get to say, oh, actually, that's not prostitution. It is. Just call it for what it is. OnlyFans, like I said, lewd or nude. Patreon, if it's lewd or nude. Obviously, there's some very few OnlyFans accounts, such as mine, that are non-pornographic. And there's some Patreon accounts out there that are non-pornographic. So obviously, I'm talking about the pornographic ones or lewd ones, because lewd is still a sexual activity that you are doing for a payment. Agreeing to payment for sexually arousing someone in any form. It's prostitution. So after that, the reason we have to go into sex trafficking is because not a lot of people seem to mention it when talking about the topic of prostitution, and I think it's very important to mention it because it is a part of prostitution. Sex trafficking is a leading cause of prostitution, especially that of children, worldwide. Sex trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Oh my God, I'm stumbling on my words today. To recruit or obtain or provide a person for sexual exploitation. So a lot of people think that sex trafficking actually just means you're being abducted from a foreign country and you're being shipped overseas at gunpoint, but that's actually not what sex trafficking means, and that's not how we're defining it. In this presentation, we are defining it as being, including force, but also being manipulated into it or anything like that. And sex traffickers will often do this to the vulnerable, such as abuse victims, children, the mentally ill, mentally underdeveloped, and especially those from troubled households. And sex traffickers, when I say that, it doesn't really portray what exactly a sex trafficker is. It can be a pimp, it can be a boyfriend that sold you off and turned you into a prostitute. Excuse my burps, I drink a lot of water before this and I burp a lot. Not on purpose. But yeah, that's what a sex trafficker is. They intend to make money off of you and your body, and they benefit from it. The average age of sex traffic victims, depending on the source that you look at, is 12 to 15 years of age. And I've seen a few sources say 11, and it's hard to get one age that says it's average because it just varies, but it's obviously common sense that a lot of underage people are sexually abused and profited off of, but there are sources, as I put with the superscripts you see throughout the slide, the little 10 and the little 7, that would support this, support what I'm saying, if you need the evidence. Even though a lot of this is common sense, I do provide the evidence in case you think it's not. People, especially those with mental illness, not mentally mature or developed, struggle to leave prostitution. So just because they don't have a gun pointed at their head doesn't mean that they're not being sex trafficked. How prostitutes are created? Sex trafficking. Most women describe their path into sex trade as a boyfriend turning into a pimp or girlfriend transforming into a prostitute. Pimps use violence, threats, and manipulation to keep women from leaving. Studies have found that most women engaged in prostitution want to exit the life, but the emotional and physical harm resulting from commercial sex, compounding pre-existing vulnerabilities, can make leaving difficult. So meaning, if you were, for example, abused, you have no frame of reference to help you there, and they take advantage of that and manipulate you based on that. So they know you're abused, so they'll give you maybe affirmations, or tell you you're beautiful because nobody's ever told you you're beautiful before, so then it makes you stay because you feel loved and you think that's the only way to get love. Things like that. How prostitutes are created. Desperation. Desperation plays a significant role in prostitution, it being money or validation, sometimes both. The victims usually are targeted to begin with based on their vulnerability to being lured into it, such as not being fully developed mentally, coming from an abusive household, being drug addicted, etc. As a result, they seek what love or attention they did not get, or whatever else it is, from their households or lives via prostitution. But obviously that doesn't work, and you guys will see why in this presentation. Other times, prostitution happens out of desperation for money. And obviously you have to be pretty desperate for money, or in general to go as far as to sell your own body to be used for somebody else's sexual pleasure. Prostitution is marketed to these women by the ability to make easy money and the fact that anybody can do it. And obviously, you guys can see why that would be appealing to somebody who has low self-esteem, especially people who were abused. They tend to have low self-esteem and don't think much of themselves, don't think they're worth being treated nicely or in a respectable way. So prostitution is just like an easy way to get that money and get validation, even though it's not a good way to do it. So here are the prostitution health statistics. Prostitution is multi-traumatic. 71% of prostitutes report physical assault in prostitution. 63% report rape. 89% of these respondents wanted to escape prostitution but did not have other options for survival. 75% had been homeless. 68% met the criteria for PTSD. 47 reported that they were under 18 years of age at the time of entry into prostitution. The chance to get murdered is 12 times higher for women in prostitution than women who are not. For example, sex work is the job in the UK with the absolute most significant risk for occupational homicide for women. The rates of STIs are from 5 to 60 times higher among sex workers than in general populations. The chance to get murdered is 12 times higher than women in general who are not prostitutes. So these are some pretty hefty statistics, I think. And here's part 2 of prostitution health statistics. 95% of those in prostitution experience sexual harassment that would legally be actionable in other job setting. Pretty wild. So, goes to show that their boundaries aren't really respected. 65 to 95% of those in prostitution experience sexual assault as children. 70 to 95% report physical assault while in prostitution. 60 to 75% of victims recount rape in prostitution. And I know how that sounds. Some of you might be like, what? Prostitutes can get raped? Because a lot of you don't realize that a lot of former prostitutes actually describe prostitution as paid rape because of how much violation they experience and how much their boundaries are not respected because, you know, they're not going to respect prostitutes in the first place. 75% of those in prostitution have been homeless at some point in their lives, according to this study. 85 to 95% of those in prostitution want to escape but have no other options for survival, which we already said. 68% of 854 people in strip clubs, massage parlors, and street prostitution in 9 countries met criteria for PTSD. 80 to 90% of those in prostitution experience verbal abuse and social contempt, which adversely affect them. So that's a lot of damage. I don't really think that's negotiable. So, now we are back to what I meant by the title, is prostitution consensual? So we have to know what true consent is, because verbally saying yes is not the only requirement for consent to be valid, and it's not true consent. And I know how this is going to come across to certain people. You think that I'm just crazy and coming off as a Marxist feminist to some people, but that's actually not what I mean. And a good example of somebody who can't give true consent is a child. A child cannot consent to sexual activity with an adult. And we as a society acknowledge that children cannot give true consent. Other examples of that would be mentally ill, or if you have a relevant mental illness, the mentally ill, or if you're heavily drugged, for example. You can't really consent because you don't know what you're consenting to. And that goes into this slide, requirements for true consent. You have to understand what's being consented to. It has to be voluntary and not due to threat. So meaning threat of homelessness, literal threat of gunpoint, any sort of threat that would cause you to do this, that you wouldn't do it otherwise. You have to have the freedom to say no. And the reason for that is if you don't have the freedom to say no, you need options in order to have freedom. So if you don't have the option, you're not really free. So you have to be able to say no. You need the option to say no, otherwise it wasn't your choice and it's not true consent. Like if you get raped and you say, no, I don't want to be raped, and then you get raped anyway, then you really didn't have a choice in the matter. Being raped isn't a choice, right? Mentally capable of making conscious decision. So here are some examples of things that cannot be true consent. Obviously, children consenting to sexual activity with adults. Anything that violates human rights, such as murder, abuse, slavery. And another example of things that cannot be true consent, that you really can't consent to, is breaking the law, such as buying or selling human organs. Do prostitutes meet these requirements? So is prostitution able to be consented to? Do they have true consent? And now the reason I put this, because a lot of people will say it's their body, their choice. So that's kind of what I'm addressing here. So for the first one, you need to understand what's being consented to. Do prostitutes fall under that? A lot of people would say no, because prostitutes usually don't understand the full extent of what they are consenting to. They're consenting basically to all the consequences of it, including mental illness that affects quality of life, such as depression, suicidal thoughts, PTSD, and actually killing themselves. Relationship struggles, abuse of drugs and alcohol or being abused, regret and shame, and STIs. Obviously, some of these may be more applicable than others with modern prostitution, but nonetheless, I will address that. So, must be voluntary, having the choice and not due to threat. Prostitutes usually don't have much freedom, if any, to say no, whether it be due to financial hardships or not having a more economical choice, the threat of homelessness, peer pressure, or threats of violence made against them. So, in regard to having a choice, prostitutes struggle and cannot leave the lifestyle because they don't have the means to do so. Whether that be because they feel like they ruined their own lives, or they have self-esteem issues and they feel like they're not worth becoming a normal person out of that lifestyle, or because they're locked in a room. Many options there for why they can't leave. They're being manipulated by their boyfriends that are now their pimps, things like that. Can't really consent to being manipulated. And as for must being capable of doing so, it's hard to argue that somebody mentally healthy and mature would consciously make the voluntary decision to put themselves up for sale, especially considering the consequences of doing so, like mental illness and abuse, if they consider that. They often have mental illness, drug addiction, or are abused sexually, mentally, verbally, and physically beforehand. This factors in and can hinder their decision-making skills on how they determine what a healthy lifestyle is. And basically, saying that you can consent to prostitution is kind of like trying to argue that it's similar to arguing that somebody mentally healthy and sane and mature would consent to self-harm, such as cutting themselves. But in this case, prostitution would be the self-harm, because it obviously is. It causes so many issues that we've already gone over. So someone that's mentally healthy and in their right mind would not make this decision. Why e-prostitution is not an exception. So obviously I have to address this because people will say, oh, this, and that is not applicable, even though a lot of it is. And that's what I'm here to point out. The problems that come with prostitution are not limited to only street walking, but in the entire definition of selling sexual activity, because that's what prostitution is. Online prostitution falls under this definition and is still prostitution. All prostitutes are still subject to mental illness, such as depression. And if you guys need a more real life example of this, here's something that I encountered recently. It was one of these girls with Twitter that has OnlyFans in their name to advertise that they're a prostitute. And they were bragging about how much money they were making. And they posted a screenshot, OnlyFans. And then when you search their tweets in the Twitter search bar, quotations, depression, and they had a tweet or more about how they're depressed and they haven't been able to, quote, nut in weeks. That's what she said in that case. So, little thing you can do. Find someone with OnlyFans in their name on Twitter and just do quotations and search things like depression or whatever other mental illness. And they likely have tweeted about or talked about how they had it. All prostitutions are still subject to being exploited because prostitution requires exploiting someone, because you're being reduced to a commodity, you're being reduced to an object that other people use, and that is unique to prostitution. The sexual abuse that occurs for that occupation is unique to prostitution. Not that somebody ever didn't get raped at their job or something, though. Drug abuse. They may try to use drugs to cope with their mental illness that comes from prostitution, or beforehand, because a lot of them do have mental illness beforehand or other problems. And the thing is, you can't really cure yourself of your depression so basically, to quote Rachel Moran in her book, Paid For: My Journey Through Prostitution, she says it's like smoking cigarettes while trying to cure your lung cancer, something along those lines. So there's really nothing you can do to fix it other than to stop subjecting yourself to prostitution in this situation. So they'll try to alleviate it with drugs and alleviate their depression or whatever other mental illness that's happening because of prostitution, but they're not really going for the root cause of it, which is very obvious to everybody else except them. And maybe they know it, but they still live that lifestyle because they feel like there's no way out and they're desperate for whatever it is. Verbal and mental abuse from customers totally happens. I guess you would call it verbal abuse from tweets. People say horrible things all the time to me. And I'm not even a sex worker. I'm not even a prostitute. So I can only imagine if you are putting your body out there and how entitled people would think they are to that because they don't even value you because you're selling your body. Because you don't even value yourself if you're selling your body. And sometimes it's due to circumstance and you're not in a situation to help yourself, but my point still kind of stands there in general. A lot of people do it because low self-esteem. Boundary issues. A lot of former prostitutes have talked about this, having boundary issues. When you're used to saying, specifically street walking prostitutes, you're used to saying yes, yes, yes. When you actually want to say no, you don't think to say no, and it can affect you and how you feel, your mental state, and obviously physically, because like sex is also physical. But e-prostitutes can also experience these boundary issues because they're so used to giving out their intimacy so often to strangers. So that's how that can affect them. They can have intimacy issues because they're giving out their intimacy to random strangers on the internet. And it can be damaging to future prospects, not limited to career, but you're one Google search away and someone can just find it. Especially if you get popular, right? Why e-prostitution is not an exception, 2 out of 2. Since having a troubled past is... oh my god, sorry. Since having a troubled past, such as being abused, drug abuse, mental illness, and any other vulnerabilities make it more likely to become a prostitute in general, why would online prostitution be an exception? It makes perfect sense if you have problems and then you become a prostitute, because prostitution is appealing to those who are desperate or have low self-esteem or, desperate for money, desperate for validation, because it's so easy. Anyone can do it. Prostitution is not a privilege. Anybody can do it. Anybody can open their legs. It takes no skill. It's also why it's not a job. We're going to pretend that didn't happen. Is prostitution a human right? The sale of one's body is not a human right. It is a violation of human rights. Self-harm and harming others is not a right, nor can it be consensual, as we discussed. Prostitution and sex trafficking enable the following: sexual, mental, and physical abuse, especially women and children. It brings unhealthy addiction to people's lives, especially men, porn-addicted men. Mental health issues for prostitutes and those who are addicted. It enables sex trafficking, especially on pornographic video sites such as Pornhub. And I made a video about this not too long ago. It recently came out. Pornhub was exposed for verifying an underage person that was being sexually abused on their site, and their sexual abuse was being uploaded for men to pleasure themselves to, or women to. They were out, and this is not the first time it's happened. And because of it, there's now a petition that you can sign that is asking for 1 million signatures to hold Pornhub executives accountable because they verified her, number one. And number two, they still don't do anything about it. Sure, after some time, after they've already made ad revenue, they'll take the video down, but they're still profiting off of it. And the reason that they don't add any sort of verification system, real verification system, unlike what they had, they verified a 15-year-old. That's not a verification system. They don't do any steps to prevent it. They don't have you upload your ID before you upload or anything like that. So if you guys want to go sign that petition, I'll go ahead and link it. General self-harm, general lower quality of life in society. Desensitization and being numb to happiness, depression. Destroying the future in aspect of mind, career, and spirit. And it encourages drug abuse. Many prostitutes, especially streetwalkers, hookers, and anyone involved in this lifestyle have drug problems. Common sense, but you guys can check my sources if you would like. Also, I would like to mention that men also abuse it by consuming it, and it damages their own relationships as well. And also sex trafficking, quick little thing I just want to say, also includes little boys, not just girls are sex trafficked. So here we go through the fallacies of prostitution. I see these all the time, and I thought it was worth addressing. The first one is the dumbest one. Prostitution is the world's oldest profession. Like, whenever you speak out against prostitution, you always get at least one person that will be like, prostitution's the world's oldest, most refined profession. And it's like, and? It's not, first of all, it's not a profession. Second of all, so is slavery, murder, rape, pedophilia. That people have been doing that since forever, but we don't legalize it. We still outlaw it and actively shame it. It doesn't matter if people will find a way or still try to do it. That doesn't mean that we should therefore enable it. Men selling or trading female bodies amongst each other is the oldest profession, but it does not make it acceptable behavior that is beneficial to a functional and moral society. And here's my personal favorite one. Gotta get a big burp out to that one. That's how I burp naturally, by the way. It's really not intentional. I just feel it coming up and it has to come out. Yeah. Maybe I should edit these out. Sex work is empowering. Empowerment is to have control of oneself. Sex work, which is prostitution, is a violation of human rights because it capitalizes on exploiting the vulnerable. To be exploited and dehumanized by being reduced to a commodity for someone else's benefit is not being in control, and therefore prostitution is not empowering. And we already discussed what exploiting the vulnerable is and who falls under that. Example, children, mentally ill, people that are mentally underdeveloped, people that have been abused and are subject to manipulation, etc. The loss of control and violation in prostitution is supported not only by many personal accounts of former prostitutes who speak out against prostitution, even referring to it as paid rape, but also several studies that show that if one has a history of drug, mental, physical, verbal, sexual abuse, or come from otherwise dysfunctional household, they are predisposed to becoming a prostitute or sex trafficked, because many prostitutes have these issues. So, to have such problems is the very definition of loss of control, and I think that's very interesting that people who have a sense of loss of control go for something else that gives the illusion of control, but in reality, it's just another way of not having control. So it's very counterproductive. Another thing I need to say is how we have to ask ourselves, how is prostitution empowering or having control of oneself, especially as a woman, if a man is reaping most of the benefits? Prostitution as a whole is ran by men using, selling, trading female bodies amongst each other for profit or their own benefit otherwise. For example, just one example, pimps take more than half of prostitutes' earnings. They also use the female child or otherwise body as an object and nothing more than for their own sexual pleasure and profit, even if it's at the expense of a woman or child's humanity. Despite many prostitutes using empowerment as a talking point, it is a cope not to face the reality of how damaging it is to one's body, spirit, and mind. And here's a quote that I will read off, because I know how lazy you guys are. You don't want to read. Isn't it better to make lots of money as a prostitute than working a minimum wage? It says McJob, but I said McWage. Same thing. So the answer to that is, pimps ask themselves the same question. Isn't it better to make lots of money controlling a prostitute than working a minimum wage McJob? Prostitution is not work like any other forms of employment. There is no other job where a person is expected to have their bodies penetrated repeatedly and being exposed to human fluids. There's no other job where a 13-year-old with zero experience can be sold for 100 times the price of what a 23-year-old with 10 years experience is sold. There's no other job an emancipated homeless person strung out on heroin can do, or more accurately have done to them when they're lying limp on the floor. So that kind of goes into how it requires no skill, so it's not really a profession. Ooh, I'm having to do a lot of talking. I've been talking for 30 minutes and it's so hot in here. You guys have to be easy on me for this one. The first thing that's on here that I want to show you guys is that what's interesting enough, we all know that prostitutes can make a lot of money, and that's one of the appeals to it, but a 2011 paper in Human Rights Review found that sex slaves cost on average $1,800, close to $1,900, while generating almost $30K a year, which is pretty funnily enough kind of close to what a Mick job would make you. So aside from the fact that some people do make a lot of money prostituting themselves or being prostituted, it's interesting to refer to that statistic when they're trying to avoid a McJob in the first place, but in reality, it's like the same amount of money. And they don't even get the $30,000. The pimp's taking at least half, usually more. So, kind of counterproductive to that in some cases. But obviously, that definitely mostly applies to child, or generally sex slavery, human trafficking. But still, you know, does every prostitute make $300K a year in OnlyFans? No. The abuse that is constant prostitution, indeed endemic to it, requires disassociation from yourself and the world to survive, which is true. A lot of prostitutes say that when they have sex people or whatever sexual activity is, they try to kind of like separate themselves from it, like they're two versions of themselves, like how Beyonce has Sasha Fierce and that's her alter ego. But in actuality, you are one person, you are you. So it's just a way of coping. Being subject to constant rape, being beaten to stay, prevented from looking into other options, sustaining the trauma of a war zone or torture chamber, needing drugs to keep doing it. Is this what you mean by employment? So clearly, this is all very specific to prostitution. If this were to happen any other job, it would be outlawed so fast, people would be so upset so quickly. But for some reason, with prostitution, we just give it a pass nowadays. Some more fallacies. Shouldn't prostitution be thought of as a normal job or service? Obviously, after I read the last thing, you would think not, but just to go into that a little bit more. If prostitution, which is selling one's body, is just another service equal to other services, then why is rape viewed as more horrendous than other crimes, such as being beaten? You know, you can have the same amount of physical damage, but we as a society acknowledge that rape is worse, and when you're sexually violated, it's worse than when you're physically violated in terms of the mental damage that you get from it. Being paid for rape or sexual abuse is not an occupation or service. Prostitute cannot go on a resume. It requires no skill. Anybody can do it with no effort. Just spread your legs. Minors, especially under 15, cannot typically work a regular job, yet there are many underage prostitutes. Dehumanizing oneself is not a job, it's slavery. People do not have a right to abuse others or consume their abuse, and it is not a job. As a whole, women do not enjoy prostitution as it is usually out of force, coercion, manipulation, or desperation, which we already addressed. Some more fallacies of prostitution, or rather a quote in regard to that. A 5-country study of prostitutes found that 92% wanted help getting out of prostitution immediately. 100% said they didn't want anyone they loved to ever have to prostitute their bodies for survival. If that doesn't tell you it's a red flag to become a prostitute, I really don't know what will at this point. And it gets even more interesting. In Germany, the service union offered union membership to Germany's estimated 400,000 sex workers. They would be entitled to health care, legal aid, 30 paid holidays a year, to get raped, 5-day work week, and Christmas, holiday bonuses, etc. Out of 400,000 sex workers, only 100 joined the union, which is too many zeros to read. 0.00025% of German sex workers. Women do not want to be prostitutes. There is no sensible feminist reason to ignore the 92% of prostitutes who do not consider it work, but slavery in favor of the 8% minority, especially when doing so only affirms the rape culture that affirms men's entitlement to use women's bodies anyway. In my interpretation, I know that some people will hear that and think it's a feminist talking point, and some feminists may use that last part as a talking point, but when I hear rape culture in regard to prostitution, I'm aware that prostitution being referred to as paid rape is a thing, and that's how former prostitutes view it, and prostitutes that are in it that don't have the strength to leave or can't leave for whatever reason. So in terms of streetwalkers, there is kind of a rape culture because almost all of them are sexually violated, even if they don't think prostitution is rape per se, as shown with the statistics some slides ago. But yeah, that's not written by me. That's actually a quote from this website that I cited. So, fallacies, prostitution, 5 out of 6. Only sex workers should talk about sex work. Stay out of it. No. That's not the whole slide, I'm kidding. We should ask ourselves, are only women who are directly involved in domestic violence to be entitled to denounce it? Domestic violence is a structural form of violence against women that affects us all because it is about societal values. Prostitution also affects us all because it conveys norms and representations to young people and what is acceptable. It is trivialized and even glamorized by the media and culture industry. The media advocating for the violation of human rights is a concern for everyone, especially when the vulnerable are susceptible to the misleading lies on why prostitution is glamorous. And obviously it's concerned to have the public misled about a dehumanizing lifestyle of abuse and trauma, such as prostitution. Very dangerous. So it's not just them problem, it's our problem. It's our problem. Fallacies of prostitution. 6 out of 6. We're finally here. Some women want to be prostitutes. And this was kind of addressed in the last slide about the minority versus the majority. But I'm just going to go ahead and go at it. Some people freely accept to work for less than minimum wage. Example given, undocumented migrants, at least in America, or illegal immigrants. Maybe some people would even agree to sell an organ if they were desperate enough for money or whatever it is. In both cases, our society has decided to prevent such exploitation by implementing laws to protect the most vulnerable and guarantee human rights, which is a decent life for all. In the examples provided of being exploited, the law condemns the employer or the buyer of the organ. Similarly, the law should also criminalize the sex buyer regarding prostitution. Some persons might indeed claim that they chose to be in prostitution, but a democratic society is not built based on individual claims, the minority, that do not reflect the situation of the overwhelming majority. We should consider what is best for society as a whole. At stake are the futures we are creating and the society we want to live in. In this day and age, we should be more concerned about women's and men's right to not be in prostitution than the women who claim, I don't believe you by the way, but for the women who claim that they consent to violate their own human rights. Like I said, you can't consent to selling your organ. You can consent to donating it. You can't consent to buying an organ. So we as a society recognize that we do not have true consent for violating human rights. So this is also why some women want to be prostitutes. Is not an argument, and it's not empowering. It's not freedom. It's sexual slavery. And those who partake in it are also sexually enslaved, such as people who are addicted to porn, consuming it in general. So when I say that, your brain probably went to men and pornography. And I know people are going to say, oh, women watch pornography too. But prostitution, I want to address specifically how prostitution affects men. 50% of religious men stated they were addicted to pornography. 63% of pastors confirmed they struggle with sexual addiction or compulsion. 54% of men polled that they recently visited porn sites at least frequently. 79% of men between ages of 18 through 30 view pornography monthly. 67% of men between the ages of 31 through 49 view pornography monthly. So the percent, even though it went down as they get older, it's still pretty high. Men are 543% more likely to look at pornography than women. So that's kind of why I say that. If men are that much, 543% more likely, I think we need to start addressing pornographic addiction and it being a man problem, even though some women may experience that, because that number is just too big. 36% of sex traffic victims are boys, and they grow up to be prostitutes because they're accustomed to that lifestyle if they don't escape it. 98% of men reported internet porn use in the last 6 months, for a total of 85% of respondents for porn use within the last week. Just to be clear, these are two different sources. That's why the superscript says 17 and the other one says 18. Anyway, they actually might be the same website. I have to check. But anyway, all the sources are in one of the last slides, so you guys can reference it. But anyway, 98% of men reported internet porn use in the last 6 months, for a total of 85% of respondents. For porn use within the last week, the numbers were lower, 80% of men and 26% of women. Pre-recorded videos were the most common type of online porn use, meaning like the other option would be cam girls and stuff like that. For both men and women, those who reported using porn more often noted a more significant perceived lack of control. Not very empowering. But yeah, crazy numbers. Honestly, terrible to hear and learn. I was not happy. I became less happy researching this topic, honestly, for the sources that are out there. porn in marriage, and I got this from a website called husbandhelphaven.com/porn statistics. And I went ahead and screenshotted this specific one because it's relevant to the previous slide. How is porn use impacting otherwise healthy marriages? What happens in a relationship where one partner looks at porn? When one spouse is using porn, 68% of couples report a decrease in sex life. You know, guys, and I'm really inclined to believe this, especially when there's a whole website dedicated to helping husbands that watch porn. Definitely a men's issue. In 68% of divorces, one spouse has met a new lover over the internet. So I guess that's relevant. A lot of people meet online nowadays. In 56% of divorces, at least one spouse had obsessive interest in porn. 56% obsessive interest in porn. Married, they do this. 75% of the time, a spouse's porn viewing will be discovered on accident. Like, they're not even, so, like any addiction, people tend to be dishonest about it to themselves and everyone else because they know it's shameful, and that's the reason they hide it. Why else would they hide it? Why else would it be 75% of the time that it's discovered on accident? I mean, by accident, the women probably went on their phones or something, let's be real. But still, for them to purposely hide it and do that. 70% of wives who discover their husband's porn addiction display signs of PTSD. Honestly, I can't imagine going through that. I feel really bad for anyone that has to deal with that. So here's why legalizing prostitution is not the answer. Legalizing prostitution does not protect anyone. And that's often the first response when you go and talk about how terrible prostitutes are treated. And it, in fact, increases sex trafficking. Legalizing prostitution will normalize the violation of human rights to begin with, especially that of children and women. And by selling people as objects to be used as commodities, many prostitutes are introduced to the lifestyle as a result of sex trafficking as it is. So logically, the amount of sex trafficking will increase with legalization of prostitution. And we all agree, I'm sure even before we saw this presentation that I made, despite me having, terrible reading skills and speaking skills, I know, hard to believe I made it. I gave credits in one of the last slides for those who helped me research it. But anyway, we all agreed before we saw this presentation that human trafficking, sex trafficking, was not acceptable or moral. So why would you want to legalize prostitution and increase that? Period. When brothels are legal, it is harder for investigators to know where to look and discover because it blends in, and who is being forced or coerced into selling themselves versus adults doing it out of free will. And the reason I put free will in quotations is, again, refer to, is it true consent? So is it really free will? When brothels are illegal, all brothels are shut down and thoroughly investigated. So basically, legalizing prostitution, I'm talking about all prostitution, causes any of the bad statistics to increase. Obviously, porn is already illegal, but if we legalize the ones that are illegal, then you're going to get more problems and more people are going to get hurt, whether it's the prostitute or the person consuming it that supports it. So in conclusion, if the goal is to preserve and respect human rights truly, then should we not actively work to keep prostitution illegal? For the protection of human rights for men, women, and children, prostitution should be illegal in all of its forms. Because as I explained throughout the slides, all of it is very damaging and does not do society any good. The exploitation of human rights of the vulnerable demands criminalization. This includes, but is not limited to, sex traffickers, pimps, porn directors, and those who purchase sexual activity directly. For example, men who directly purchase sex from streetwalkers, they too should be criminalized. They keep it alive. We should make a conscious effort to prevent the dehumanization of our people and to label prostitution as such accurately, not a label that attempts to normalize or integrate it into our society. An example, sex work. We must actively reject labels that try to legitimize prostitution. Not only prostitutes, but we, society, cannot consent to the violation of human rights. And should we as a society accept prostitution, we are also accepting and normalizing the drug abuse, human trafficking, preventable mental illness, exploitation of the vulnerable, exploitation of children, rape, and other abuse that follow. So thank you for everyone who managed to stick it out. I would have condensed and made it shorter if I could, but there was a lot of information. I had to address a lot of things, and I'll likely link the slideshow in the description for you guys to be able to click these sources, but you know, in case you can't for some reason, you know, you can always just screenshot it and type it in your own browsers. Make sure I'm not blocking anything. That's why I did the format like this. I made the presentation smaller so I could take less of it up so you guys could read all of it. Here are the video sources that would be helpful towards this topic, and I give my personal book recommendations that I have read and I think they're good reads for people who are new to the topic and need to educate themselves on it. And there's some articles here that you guys can go ahead and take a look at if you want more information, like you just didn't get enough out of this presentation. And I just want to say thank you to the people who helped me research. Even if it was just a little, it helped me, and for some of these people a lot. But even if it was just a little, it helped me find other information. And I don't know if I could have given this presentation as accurately as I did without their help, so special thanks to them. Thank you all for watching. Share this video, share it whenever somebody comes at you about why prostitution is good, empowering, blah blah, and you don't have the verbal skills to say all this, because it's a lot. It's 50 minutes. Like how do you say that in one tweet, right? So just link them this video. It's important that we get this out there and dispel this fiction that prostitution is good for our society. We, society. If you'd like to support me, there's ways to do that in the description. I have a Patreon, obviously non-pornographic. I have ways that you guys can join my Discord where we discuss things of varying topics, anime, memes, anything at all, Corona. I can't even think of all the channels in my head that are on the Discord channel because there's so many. And be sure to check my description out. Follow me on social media. I tweet a lot. I have a Facebook page where I post a lot of news articles if you want somewhere to get some news. And I'll see you guys in the next video. I might have to make more of these because I feel like once I make this, you guys are going to have 1,000 other things you want me to address. So, see ya.